Hey there, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for joining me. Today we are talking about 3 dive watches that all cost around $3,000, give or take. These are 3 watches with distinct, unique personalities, but all 3 brilliant in their own way. They are the Tudor Pelagos 39, the Omega Cmaster 300, reference 2231.50, and the Sinn U50. Not only are all 3 of these watches very capable tool watches, dive watches, they're also great daily companions. They're very comfortable to wear, and they're very practical, everyday use watches that will work pretty well with most of your wardrobe, unless you're the type that wears suits every day, in which case you probably don't watch this channel. Now I want to start with a watch that is no longer in production today. This is the Omega Cmaster 300, reference 2231.50. This is a Gen 1 Cmaster from the early 2000s, built entirely from titanium. I love this generation of the Cmaster 300. It's very svelte and low profile on the wrist, and the helium release valve is much smaller than it is on some of the more modern references as well. Now this so-called Peter Blake example has the broadsword hands, which are a departure from the open skeletonized hands that we find elsewhere on the Cmaster 300. Now that move alone makes this watch a lot more palatable and accessible in my mind. This watch is pretty thin at around 12 millimeters, a little over 47 millimeters from lug to lug, and about 41 millimeters in diameter. I'm also very fond of the case design of this watch. It incorporates that twisted lug, and it's all uniform in finish with this kind of satin brushed texture everywhere. Now those measurements, coupled with the fact that this is entirely made of titanium, make this watch really exceptional on the wrist. This might be the watch that wears the best out of all 3 of these watches in day-to-day use. It's also highly legible thanks to the high contrast dial, and yes, it does have that kind of tight wave pattern that is present on the matte black dial. Overall, this is a watch with a lot of personality, and it speaks to one of Omega's most historic dive watch collections in the Cmaster 300. I love this execution of it in particular, and it just feels that much more approachable, even compared to the modern iterations of the Cmaster 300. Now these watches can be had for under $3,000 these days. This is a reference that kind of flies under the radar, but it's one that you should certainly be aware of. Next up, we're moving to a watch from Tudor. This is the Pelagos 39. This is also entirely made of titanium. As the name suggests, it's 39 millimeters in diameter. It's also 12 millimeters in thickness and about 46.5 millimeters from lug to lug. This watch also wears really well, and it has that same uniform matte texture across the case and the bracelet that I really enjoy. This has a more straightforward black on black dial and bezel insert, but a closer look will reveal some subtle textures here. The bezel has something of a sunray finish that catches light in interesting ways. I find that it can look really neutral gray in some light, which I kind of enjoy. And then the dial underneath also has a very subtle sunray texture to it as well. But at a glance, and for all intents and purposes, this reads as pretty much just a flat black on black dial and bezel. There's also a very high contrast, highly legible dial. This is the only one of these 3 that forgoes the date. So this is about as straightforward as you can get. There are 1, 2, 3, 4 lines of text on the dial at the bottom of this, but the word Pelagos is rendered in red, which is kind of a callback to vintage Rolex models that we've talked about in videos prior to this. I'll leave a link to those down below. But because of that, it kind of reduces the visual weight of that copy on the bottom of the dial and makes for just an overall really handsome watch. If you like the Pelagos collection, but you find all the other ones a little bit too intense, this is a great option for you. It's still a modern diver through and through. There's no real vintage callbacks or anything like that in this watch. This is about as straightforward as a modern tool watch, dive watch as you can get, and it's a great watch for everyday use. Now this watch trades for around $3,500, $3,800 on the open market these days, give or take a few $100s. This watch does use Tudor's in-house movement, the MT5400, which is a COSC certified chronometer. In my time with the watch, I found it to be well within that standard. Next up, we have the Sinn U50, and this was released just a few years ago, and it's a watch that takes the design of the very popular U1 and sizes it down to a 41 millimeter case diameter. Now on the wrist, you'd swear this is a 40 millimeter watch, and that's because it pretty much is at the point that it hits your wrist. That diameter measurement is taken from the edge of the bezel, which is 41 millimeters. One of the reasons this feels a bit trimmer is the crown placement down at 4 o'clock. There are no crown guards here or anything like that. So this tucks up really nicely on the wrist. It's also the thinnest of the 3 at 11 millimeters in thickness and a little over 47 millimeters from lug to lug. This watch wears really, really well, regardless of the configuration that you get it in. It comes in an SDR configuration with a black bezel, and then you have this one here, which is entirely tegimented steel with a tegimented steel bezel as as well. I find that it works really well here with the red and black infill in the numerals in that bezel. To me, it kind of adds to the iconic Sinn U1 look. This watch is just unmistakable, and I really love the unique design language here, and that carries through to the dial as well. The hour and minute hand are these big towering blocks over the dial. There's something brutalist in nature about the design of this watch. That also makes it really easy to read at a glance. Sinn is of course really good at that kind of thing. Anything that's not necessary is rendered in red, and everything else just pops forward, and it's pretty easy to read at a glance. One of my favorite details about this watch is the crystal. It's flat, and most of the time you'd swear that there was nothing there. It looks like you could just stick your finger right into the dial. I love flat crystals like this, and I wish more tool watches would embrace it and get away from some of the domed crystals that we see out there that can cause some distortion or glare. This just seems like a much better practical solution for a watch like this. It might not win you the same style points, but in use I think it's a move that makes a lot of sense. So these are three exceptional dive watches that all come in around $3,000, give or take a little bit. Where would you be putting your money here, and which of these designs speak to you the most? If you have $3,000 to spend on a dive watch, are you going to pick one of these three? Are you going a different direction? I'd love to hear from you. What do you think is giving you the most bang for your buck in that price category? Of course, $3,000 is not cheap. These are all premium dive watches, and you can get a great dive watch for well under $1,000 these days, of course. But there's something special about these three watches in particular, and I'd love to hear your take on them as well. Now, if I had to pick just one of these to keep in my collection, it would probably be the Sinn U50, but ask me again tomorrow and it might be a different answer. There's no going wrong with any of these, and each of them have their own distinct personality, all while being great examples of modern dive watches. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this one. A quick reminder that we will be at Watches and Wonders next month covering the show live, so be sure to get subscribed to the channel if you're not already. We'll have lots of content coming from Switzerland come April. If you enjoy this content, leaving a like and sharing helps me out a lot as well. Thanks so much for tuning in, and until next time, take care.